Will using baking soda instead of baking powder affect the texture of my cake?
Hello, baking enthusiasts. Today, we're exploring a common question among home bakers and professionals alike. Will using baking soda instead of baking powder affect the texture of my cake?
Understanding baking soda and baking powder.
Before we dive into the heart of the matter, it's important to understand what baking soda and baking powder are. Both are leavening agents, which means they help your baked goods rise. However, they do so in different ways and are not always interchangeable. Baking soda, or sodium bicarbonate, is a base that needs to react with an acid, like vinegar or buttermilk, in a recipe to produce carbon dioxide gas. This gas forms bubbles that make your baked goods rise and become fluffy. On the other hand, baking powder is a mix of baking soda, an acid, and a starch. It doesn't need any additional acid in the recipe to work because it carries its own acid. It starts a leavening reaction when it gets wet and then again when it gets heated.
How does this impact the texture of a cake?
Now, what happens when you swap baking soda for baking powder in a cake recipe? If you use baking soda instead of baking powder, without adding any acid to the recipe, your cake might not rise as much as it should. This is because baking soda alone won't create the necessary gas unless it reacts with an acid. The result can be a denser, flatter cake. Additionally, since baking soda is stronger than baking powder, using the same amount could leave a residual, soapy taste if there's not enough acid to neutralize it. Therefore, if you need to make this substitution, you also need to account for the acid-base reaction. In reverse, if you use baking powder instead of baking soda, the result can be a cake that rises too much and then collapses. Baking powder is not as strong as baking soda, so you usually need more of it for the same effect. In conclusion, using baking soda instead of baking powder can indeed affect the texture of your cake. It can result in a denser, flatter cake if not balanced with an acid. However, remember that each recipe is different, and it's always best to follow the recipe as written for the best results. Happy baking!